All right, so getting back to energetics, I want to talk about how informational data sets are used in Hollywood and other forms of repetition or repetition exercises in order to anchor information to etheric energy. And I think that what they're doing is that they're using a process that, for lack of a better term, I'll call it archaeometry, based on a form of archaeology that involves data patterning, remote sensing, and geophysics. Okay, meaning that when people are doing archaeological activities, that they're integrating these practices of more like remote sensing might be, you could call that a lot of ways. That could be just examining satellite footage or aerial footage, but it could also involve intuitive information, intuitive sensing, what some people might call psi research type things as well. And the reason why I think that that might be the appropriate term for this is because since we're dealing with POR and DOR, which is sort of like ether, and it's a misunderstood energy, I think the reason why we need to have this discussion is because there's people out there that are actually integrating these sciences of like, well, not sciences, but like they're integrating like occult work of numerology and into the science of the technology that actually exists in the real world. So there's frequencies that are involved that we're using all around us. There's types of information systems that are all around us, and that what they do is they take those naming conventions and those words, they integrate them into the characters that are part of the occult work. But then those same people that are doing the occult work are also taking part in the ether extraction. So by integrating all this information of their characters from the entertainment into what they're doing in the process of the ether extraction, it's sort of binding that information in a way that's going to be predictable later to recall upon as etheric energy. It makes the behavior of ether more predictable. So say if they're extracting DOR from somebody and that person's in a state of trauma, and in tandem they're being binded with the language of the people that are doing it. It's for example the numerology. So if it's a Nazi occultist and they want an etheric signature to be of Nazi occultism because that's the type of belief system they're trying to spawn, then really what they're going to be doing is integrating the 88s, the Heil Hitlers, and the 14s, and for all these different things that Nazis do inside their occult work, they're going to try to anchor those symbols into the consciousness using archaeometry. That's one of the reasons why the zodiac might be a useful thing to reference when thinking this through a little bit, because that might have been in like a newspaper form of doing that. And today, what we might be dealing with entertainment is just a modern form of that exact practice. It's like doing something that shocks the public and then anchoring it with a symbol. And then that symbol is anchored to the ether. Now that ether becomes a predictable energy to the people that know how to manage that energy and where it's going to travel and how to find it where it winds up later on by integrating concepts of like the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, thinking it through a little bit, how you have a spiral that exists in nature within everything. And these people kind of know where it's going to land once it makes the next round as it's going around in that circle. Think of it in terms of that. Archaeometry is dealing with an etheric energy. It's tapping into that spiral. And because there's math contained within that spiral, they're attaching non-etheric energy, numerology, for example, into it. And I think that it would be logical to call the process of locating that or doing it a form of archaeometry, but I'm not going to tell you that that's the official thing. It's just my preference for the time being. So, a lot of times this is going to involve, these people that are doing this work attaching their signature to it like a watermark. So think of it in that terms. It's almost like it's their brand to have their specific image anchored to it as, if you want to call it occult work, that's fine. But I think the occultism is really driving an industry of ether, and that it's less that these people are classic occultists and more that they're people that understand a science and they practice it using occultism as a methodology. I think that that's the best way to describe it. So I don't want people to get too caught up on what's, you know, that. Okay. But getting to Ray Donovan, I mean, the show itself, if you think about it, Ray Donovan seems to be making reference in the name itself, Ray, Well, a ray is like a beam. It's something that you can direct at, like the microwave dish argument, right? You can aim it at somebody and you can actually fry them or cook them with a ray. So thinking this through a little bit, if we're dealing with an energetic system that potentially can redirect DOR energy, and that's etheric energy of a deadly nature, meaning that when a person's basically experiencing death or towards the end of their life, they're going to be more of a on the DOR spectrum as opposed to the POR spectrum. When they're full of life, they're in loving relationships with their spouses, they're experiencing loving extractions of POR or whatever. So there's a difference in the energy that the person is emitting. So it seems almost like this DOR methodology involves specifically being able to target a person and extract it from them. And there's a method to that I don't want to get too deep into it now, except to say that the reason why I'm trying to talk about POR and DOR without saying the word orgone excessively is because I think a lot of people misunderstand that Wilhelm Reich's research in that term. And I'm not going to claim to be the expert, except to say that you can't just build a bunch of little silicone pyramids and do this. That's not what this is about, okay? What I'm telling people with the pyramid energy is that there was a system through which there was an underground system that channeled into a water body. If you look up the research, right, there used to be water that flowed under there in limestone, and that the water would shift back and forth, and that created energy, like kinetic energy, like a suction underneath the water that traveled up through that tube system into the pyramid, okay? Now, think about what Wilhelm Reich was doing with those tubes and the cloud buster. It's kind of a mimicking of the technology. He's just taking the water body, right, putting those hoses down in there. Well, that's like the tunnel that goes under the pyramid, of the Giza pyramids, right? And then he's aiming the other one up at the sky. Now, this is where it differs a little bit from the inner workings of the pyramid. Now, there's people standing around that device, the cloud buster, but in tandem with that, he's also running a signal on a weather balloon that's at 1,680 megahertz, roughly. That's what was used in those tests, okay? And it was a pulse modulated signal on that weather balloon. And so what a lot of people miss when they're talking about Wilhelm Reich and orgone energy in the POR-DOR spectrum was that signal that was being generated via the weather balloon. And that's a megahertz frequency. And that's relevant because I found that frequency in my research. I have a spectrum, I do spectrum analysis, okay? I have all the equipment to measure these things. I have actually taken screenshots and measured it in real time. And there's a sweeping pulsing signal that goes between 1,680 through 1,683 megahertz that's consistent wherever I find this methodology of extraction, or what I think is DOR extraction, occurring, okay? And it's consistent. And here's the thing, I do not find this signal if I'm in motion, meaning if I take my test equipment out and I try to set it up where I'm mobile, I will not be able to find this same signal. Whoever does this, they need the person to be relatively stationary or be in a contained environment where they can control from all different sides your radio frequency environment. But the system itself, the ether itself, is not in the megahertz range. That's not what I'm saying. It's that whatever they learned from cloud busting using weather balloons, they now have translated that technology to a human being. Because when you think about it, what they were doing was sending the cloud up into the air and pulsing it at 1680 megahertz and then causing the cloud to break up. Well, that's moisture, right? Well, the human body is 70% water, so if you aim a 1,680 megahertz signal at a human being and do the same thing, are you not sort of just mimicking that process, right? Thus, the DOR extraction, human ether as a transferable energy. But a lot of people don't want you to know this exists, obviously, for various reasons, because what Wilhelm Reich discovered is that it can power motors. What Wilhelm Reich discovered was that it could cure diseases. And so you can see how this is a problem for a number of industries where you could potentially be running motors on human energy. You could potentially be curing diseases with human energy. And so that would mean that people that were capable of producing a large amount of POR energy would suddenly have an economy surrounding them, and these other industries would not. They would not have as much value. Standard medicine would not have as much value. Standard methods of powering things would not have as much value, because we could do it off of convertible human energy, specifically one that's being harnessed from either the human orgasm or, in some cases, from the process of a person experiencing death. See? Now you understand why there's this economy surrounding trauma. Do you understand now? So this is relevant because we're going to want to discuss in terms of what's going on out at Primm and the coded language, because in order to make a network like this works, there has to be private communication. And the people that are doing this seem to be running what are called BlackBerry Enterprise servers. BlackBerry is a company that was it used to be called RIM, Research in Motion. Their stock ticker was RIMM. So I think a lot of times when you see Primm being used, I think it's a reference within the show at least to the RIM network. And that would make sense, because if they have been building an energetic system that's designed for this between Southern California out to Nevada, they would have needed a communication network to support that. So what I'm thinking might have happened is in the process of doing this energy extraction methodology, whoever was running the private network just sort of had an idea to continue to expand upon that and offer that private network to people who did not want to be on a normal communication network, to where they could be on a private, BlackBerry Enterprise server network that others could not access. And there would be other reasons to do that. Would involve alternative technologies that only certain people have accesses to. That would be like a heads-up type display, exotic visual layers that I don't want to get into. But there's a lot of things that are driving the BlackBerry Enterprise server economy that I don't have a full understanding of. I just know that there's people that are selling it. And they seem to have a private network that works much in the same way that the government's does to work for the president, where they would exploit these underground tunnel systems to go from one end to the other, and then have hotspots that go into safe buildings where a person can just stop into that building, go into wherever their network is, and they would be on the BlackBerry Enterprise server. What supports this is I see a lot of people using the same acronyms that BlackBerry uses to communicate their BlackBerry Enterprise servers. For example, they're called BES for BlackBerry Enterprise server, which for people just call those BES servers a lot of times. They'll just say, hey, that's a BES. Did you hook that up to the BES? And so you might notice that people that are involved with this type of work will oftentimes make reference to BES, which there's another name for that for mobile devices, where back in the old days you could only have BlackBerry devices on a BlackBerry server, but when it opened up to other types of devices, it was called good, and they called it specifically good for enterprise. And so that meant you could put an iPhone on a BlackBerry encrypted server and get the same encryption. So really, I think that the essence of BlackBerry encryption is really the tunnel network, and it has a lot less to do with the encryption itself, which my understanding is it is exceptionally good encryption, but it would have been defeated by now if it only relied on that. There would have been somebody that would have cracked it, I think, or, again, I'm not an expert in these things, but I think really at its core is the tunnel network that makes it private, because it doesn't use the same points above ground that other people's networks have to travel through. This is one that's privately run through a tunnel system. So you can see why there would be an entire series, or there'd be shows or entertainment that would surround selling that type of service to elite clients, because only certain people can afford it. And so, you can afford to produce entertainment that's designed for them as a commercial. And that's going to tie into how that connects to these BlackBerry Enterprise servers, and how they might be driving the core technology that's helping some of the Amazon highway systems. It feeds into a network called the Intelligent Transportation System, which I need to do a whole nother article on that that'll connect to this later. But it would also make use of not only certain frequencies, but a series of enterprise servers that I think that they've taken mobile in vehicles. So some of these vehicles that you're finding driving around, or large semi-trucks, are either repeaters for, or actual BlackBerry Enterprise servers in and of themselves that are just running it on a drive as a vehicle. And they're sort of doing like a decentralized thing, similar to the way that Bitcoin works, where they can just drive around, one vehicle can hive into the other, and it's kind of like a Y-mesh type system. I'll get into that another time, though, because again, I'm kind of having to speculate a bit on that one, and as well as research real systems that do sort of work that way, so I don't want to muddy the waters here too much. But if you notice that Primm continues on towards Enterprise, when you get into Las Vegas area and Henderson, there's a whole neighborhood there called Enterprise. So not only do you have Primm, Nevada here, then Gene in between, then on your way out, right as you enter in the Las Vegas area, you hit Enterprise. I did some research on that, and I'm going to share that in another article as well, because that's going to tie into people that use a naming convention of good. So again, deviating away from Ray Donovan here for a bit, a lot of times you're going to see people that have good servers calling themselves Goodman, or Guten something, or something that's going to integrate the word good in various languages. So like, and I have an example of that here. When you get to the show involving Primm, there's a story arc in season 4, right, on Ray Donovan, where there's a character that they have some interactions with or some run-ins with who owns the casinos out in Primm, Nevada, and his name is Little Bill. Okay, I thought that was interesting because the guy that plays Little Bill is Ted Levine, and those who are familiar with the film Silence of the Lambs might remember Ted Levine because he played the serial killer in that movie. And what I thought was interesting about this is that he not only played that character, but he played Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. So I think what this is doing is tapping into archaeometry. It's tapping into that method I was telling you before. This same actor, Ted Levine, he played a notorious serial killer that threw people in the well and tortured them in the movie Silence of the Lambs. That was sort of traumatizing to a lot of people that saw it, even though it was entertainment, right? So they're kind of tapping into the archaeometry of it. That's an energy signature that a lot of people remember, but it's kind of distant. They don't recall exactly where it is. And then they see this film, they're going to watch the Ray Donovan series and see him playing Little Bill Primm. Well, what's interesting about that is that you may not be aware as you're watching it, excuse me, he plays Little Bill who lives in Primm, but you may not know that there at the state line in Primm, Nevada is a casino called Buffalo Bill Casino. So isn't that weird? They have a guy named Ted Levine who played Buffalo Bill in the movie Silence of the Lambs back in the early 90s, now play a fictional character who lives in Primm where a real casino named Buffalo Bill exists. To me, that's a little bit how they're doing these energy loops as part of the archaeometry, how they're binding things to ether and riding off of an old thing to basically kind of you see where I'm going with this? It's sort of like a momentum play. They knew that that Buffalo Bill character was shocking to people, so it's like it's feeding on your subconscious a little bit through these subtle clues that you don't even necessarily remember. And that's a little bit how the golden spiral works and predictable etheric signatures and watermarks. Okay? So, building on that, there's another character in that season that's played by a guy named Ismael Cruz Cordova, and this is really what got me interested in the story arc of the character, because I kind of thought that I noticed the code being used by him, and obviously, full disclosure, he's using the same last name for his middle name as I have as my last name, so that gets me interested too, and I noticed that he played a character, a boxer, named Hector Campos. Now, it looks a little cipherish to me. He, see, Tor, the guy who sees the tunnel entrance, Campos, they record things. It's a place where you purchase somebody who's going to record things. So you enter the tunnel, somebody records it. That sounds a lot like dark web. It sounds a lot like, what I've been seeing with the etheric things before. Cordova, that would be a sign that it's in the tunnel. So our core, C-O-R, right? RD for Ray Donovan, and OVA for egg. A lot of times I see them making reference to an egg or an ova because whoever is doing it is part of the Human Genome Project. And if they're connected to the Human Genome Project, there's a tendency that they're doing this form of etheric extractions. And I'll get into that again another time. But right now I just kind of want to get into archaeometry, numerology, and how they're binding it to ether, using entertainment. And the reason why it's specifically referenced to it, how I just told you about Buffalo Bill earlier, right? Well, this character that Ismael Cruz Cordova plays, named Hector Campos, as a boxer, he has an avatar, which I really do think he is. I don't believe he's a real person. His name makes reference to a child character in the movie Boys from Brazil, which, if you recall from one of my other articles, it's about a Nazi experiment, genetics experiments, where they create 94 clones of Hitler and give them all a predictable, traumatizing event to where they can do something to get all the boys to do the same thing at the same time. Okay, so knowing that they're kind of making a cheeky reference to Boys from Brazil by having the character in that movie that gets caught by Joseph Mengele and run through an experiment, that's kind of disturbing to me. So there's a plot line in it where Ismael holds onto a radio and helps spy on Joseph Mengele's meeting, and he gets caught by them. And then Joseph Mengele winds up taking him back to this lab and doing experiments on him. And they do a quick little reference to that in the movie. So I don't know how far I want to go into the whole cipher on Ismael Cruz Cordova, except to say that, when I looked him up, it said that he's from Aguas Buenas. That means good waters. If you know how this etheric process works, it involves water, plumbing, it involves a water heater parts, a watts.com, you see what I'm saying? It also involves good servers and Bez servers. Well, the person that I know to be attached to this did have signs that they seem to be promoting Bez servers, and that's as much as I want to say at the moment, except that they were using the law of reversal to communicate this. And so I don't believe that this actor is actually this person. I think that it's another person that uses CGI avatar, and they seem to be connected to a network of people that have similar access to it based on some of the people that they're doing creative work with more recently. So what supports all this is that, and before I say this, I want to say that I'm a fan of Liev Schreiber. I tend to like his work, so I don't really have a problem with Liev Schreiber on any level. I've always found his appearance in films to be pretty entertaining, so I didn't really like to find this information, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And even if it is, it doesn't necessarily be a sign that he's this thing, but let me just get to it. I found this article by a lady that was researching Operation Paperclip, and they put a whole bunch of photos of different Operation Paperclip scientists up there. Two of them look like Hollywood actors. I don't want to talk about the other one right now, but one was named Walter Schreiber, which matches the exact naming and spelling convention of Liev Schreiber, the actor. And so, of course, I had to at least, ask the question, are these two related? Because I have to say they do bear a pretty strong resemblance. So. Operation Paperclip scientists like Walter Schreiber did wind up at the Department of Energy and NASA primarily, so it's logical to assume that anything that might be involved with an energy weapon would have been something that a Schreiber would have been involved in. And then you add into that the fact that his name is Ray Donovan. I have to say it has all the signs of somebody that's employing archaeometry into their practice of etheric extraction, advertising services involving rays, beams, good servers, Bez servers, the Primm, the Buffalo Bill. Notice how you have the serial killer binded into the archaeometry of this one too, you see. There's something to these etheric signatures and the way they're trying to bind trauma to them to create DOR spectrum energy. So that's why, I'm sorry I'm having to get with this material into some things that involve human sexuality excessively if it's bothering some people, but you need to understand what's happening here is you have people that are doing deeply dark activity because they are in the process of re-radiating etheric energy that most people don't understand yet. So one of the ways of reversing that is going to have to be healthier expressions that reverse these activities. So I have to be able to talk about these things openly with folks that you understand what's kind of going on, but without, providing some solutions in the process. So I'm going to bounce back and forth between solutions and what's wrong and everything like that way. But, I do have a lot of data. I'm going to get into more specific numbers here soon too. So, but, just want to say that just because I locate these patterns and find these things and they have correlations, it doesn't mean they're definitive. And I want people to understand that. And to any of these people involved with this creative work, if you ever reach out to me and you have a disagreement or anything like that, we can definitely have a conversation, and I wouldn't mind doing that because I didn't mean any disrespect in pointing all these things out, but it's a pretty definitive pattern. I do think there's a science to this archaeometry and binding these events to etheric energy, even if sometimes the actors themselves aren't aware of it. So I at least wanted to offer that as an option. So anyways, I really appreciate everybody listening, and thank you for your time.